In Willow's End, Halloween wasn't just a holiday, it was a grand, eagerly awaited festival. Every year as October drew to a close, the sleepy town awoke with a supernatural buzz. Houses on Maple Street, the oldest road in town lined with towering maples and ancient oaks, boasted some of the most extravagant decorations: gargantuan spider webs stretched between branches, skeletons that laughed hauntingly in the wind, and jack-o'-lanterns with flickering, mischievous grins. This year, however, a peculiar unease had settled over the residents. As the sun dipped below the horizon each evening, casting long shadows across the crisp, fallen leaves, whispers of unease circulated. Locals spoke of seeing figures flitting between the trees at the edge of the woods, a place usually avoided by superstitious old-timers who muttered about spirits disturbed by the chill of fall. 17-year-old Tommy and his younger sister, Ellie, were setting up a scarecrow in their front yard when Mrs. Baxter, their elderly neighbor, approached along the sidewalk, her steps hesitant. "Evening, children," she greeted, her voice trembling slightly. "You've done a splendid job with the old scarecrow, but do be careful around the woods tonight." "Why, Mrs. Baxter?" Ellie asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The old woman glanced nervously towards the darkening woods. "Ah, it's probably just old wives' tales," she sighed. "But they say on Halloween night, the veil between our world and the next is thinnest. Spirits roam freely, and not all are friendly." With a shiver, she hurried on her way. Tommy watched her go, an eyebrow raised in skepticism. "Don't worry about it, Ellie. It's just Halloween talk," he reassured his sister, though the unease in his gut told a different story. As night fell, the town of Willow's End transformed. Fog curled along the streets like wraiths sliding between the light pools cast by street lamps. Children dressed as ghosts, witches, and creatures of the night scampered about, their laughter piercing the heavy, expectant air. Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that this Halloween was different. As he adjusted the scarecrow's hat, his hand brushed against something unusually cold and metallic hidden in the straw. Curious, he pulled out a small, tarnished coin engraved with strange symbols and a date from over a century ago. "Look what I found," Tommy called out to Ellie, who was placing the last candle in a pumpkin. Ellie ran over, her eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. "That's creepy. Where do you think it came from?" Tommy turned the coin over in his hand, feeling the weight of history and mystery it carried. "I'm not sure, but it feels important," he murmured, pocketing the coin for later examination. Little did he know, this Halloween would be one for the history books of Willow's End, and the coin was just the beginning of a night filled with true ghost stories. The chill of the October evening settled deeper as the last of the sunset faded into twilight. Tommy and Ellie, after finishing their Halloween setup, decided to join their friends for the traditional trick-or-treating around Maple Street. As they walked under the flickering street lamps, a slight breeze rustled the leaves and an unusual chill made Tommy clutch the mysterious coin in his pocket. As they approached the center of town, where houses were clustered closer and the decorations grew even more elaborate, Tommy felt the coin grow oddly warm. Before he could mention it to Ellie, a shadow detached itself from an alley and moved toward them. The figure was cloaked, with the hood drawn over its face, making it impossible to see any distinguishing features. "Tommy," the figure whispered, extending a gnarled hand to hand him a small, crumpled piece of paper. Tommy hesitated, his heart pounding. "Yeah? Who's asking?" "Consider this an invitation," the voice rasped, as the figure slid back into the darkness without waiting for a response. Tommy unfolded the paper, revealing a heavy, black card with silver-embossed lettering that read, "You are cordially invited to a Halloween gathering unlike any other. Join us at midnight at the forgotten end of Willow Lane. Come alone." Ellie peeked over his shoulder. "Who was that? And what's this about?" "I don't know, but it's probably just someone from school trying to be spooky," Tommy replied, though the earnestness in his tone was forced. There was no Willow Lane on any town map he had seen, and the foreboding invitation intrigued him. Despite the warning to come alone, he knew he'd feel better with his friends by his side. They met up with the rest of their group, Jenna, Mark, and Luke, at the town square. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter and the sweet scent of candy. Tommy showed them the invitation, and they all exchanged excited yet nervous glances. "Sounds like an adventure to me," Mark said with a grin. "I'm in if you guys are." "Count me out," Jenna replied, a shiver running down her spine. "This has bad idea written all over it." Luke, always the peacemaker, suggested, "Why don't we at least try to find where this Willow Lane might be? If it feels off, we bail. No harm in looking, right?" With the group tentatively agreed, they spent the next hour enjoying the festivities while Tommy's thoughts raced. As midnight approached, the group, minus Jenna who opted to head home, found themselves walking toward the outskirts of town. The houses grew fewer and the woods more encroaching. A forgotten dirt path veered off from the main road, marked only by an ancient, moss-covered sign that read, "Willow Lane." Taking a deep breath and adjusting the flashlight in his hand, Tommy led the way down the path. The trees seemed to lean in closer as they walked, their branches scratching against one another in the wind like whispers of warning. The deeper they went, the more the uneasy feeling grew, but Tommy's curiosity pushed him forward, driven by the warmth of the coin and the mystery of the night. As the four friends ventured further down the obscured path of Willow Lane, the night grew darker, and the beam from Tommy's flashlight seemed to struggle against an unnatural gloom. The trees overhead rustled ominously, their leaves whispering secrets lost to the cold breeze. Mark, trying to lighten the mood, joked about ghosts and goblins, but his laughter sounded hollow in the dense, oppressive air. After what felt like an eternity, the path opened into a clearing where an old mansion loomed, its structure silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Its windows were dark, the paint peeled, and ivy climbed its walls aggressively, as if trying to drag the house back into the earth. "Is this it?" Luke whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of their own uneasy breaths. "I guess so," Tommy replied, his curiosity piqued despite the eerie setting. The invitation had led them here, to a place that seemed forgotten by time and everyone else in Willow's End. The front door was ajar, inviting yet foreboding. As they approached, a cold wind surged through the opening, as though the house itself were breathing them in. One by one, they entered the shadowy foyer, their flashlights slicing through the darkness, uncovering dust-laden furniture and portraits with eyes that seemed to follow their every move. "Let's not split up," Ellie suggested, her hand gripping Tommy's arm. They moved as one, exploring the ground floor. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. Every step on the wooden floorboards echoed through the halls, announcing their presence. They found a grand staircase spiraling upward into darkness. As they debated whether to ascend, a sudden scream pierced the air. It was Luke, calling out from the back of the house. Without thinking, they rushed towards his voice, only to find his flashlight on the ground, its light flickering against the old wood. But Luke was nowhere to be seen. "Luke!" Mark yelled, panic edging his voice. They searched the nearby rooms, calling his name, but received no response. The house seemed to absorb their voices, muffling their calls into whispers. Unease turned into fear. "We need to leave, now," Tommy insisted, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. They agreed, moving back to the foyer. But as they retraced their steps, Ellie suddenly gasped and disappeared right in front of Tommy's eyes. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone, her hands slipping from his grasp as if pulled by an unseen force. "Ellie!" Tommy shouted, his voice breaking with terror. He dropped to his knees, searching the ground where she had stood, hoping it was just a trick of the light or his imagination. But she was gone. Mark grabbed Tommy, pulling him to his feet. "We can't just stand here. We have to find them or get help," he said, his voice trembling. Tommy nodded, fighting the paralysis of his fear. With one last, desperate look around the empty foyer, the remaining two made a pact to find their friends. The mansion seemed to watch them leave, its dark windows like eyes keeping secrets in the shadows. They exited the house, the door slamming shut behind them with a sound like finality. The night was still young, and the true horror of Halloween was only just beginning. Tommy and Mark, now alone and desperate, hurried back towards the town under the oppressive shadow of the night. The weight of their missing friends bore down on them with each step away from the decrepit mansion. Upon reaching the edge of Willow Lane, Tommy paused, looking back towards the dark path, his mind racing with fear and confusion. "We need to get help," Mark said, his voice shaky. "This is way beyond us." Tommy nodded in agreement, but something deep inside him resisted the idea of involving others, fearing what might happen if the curse, or whatever malevolence they had encountered, spread further. Instead, he suggested a different approach. "Let's check the town archives first. Maybe there's something about that house or this lane that can help us." Reluctantly, Mark agreed, and they made their way to the Willow's End Public Library, which held records and newspapers dating back centuries. The building was dark, save for the security lights, but Tommy knew the night librarian, Miss Helen, who often stayed late cataloging new historical donations. They found Miss Helen in the back room, surrounded by old maps and manuscripts. Surprised to see them so late, she listened intently as Tommy quickly explained their terrifying experience. Her eyes widened with recognition when he mentioned the mansion at the end of Willow Lane. "I thought that might be it," she murmured, pulling out a large, dusty tome from a locked cabinet. "There's a legend about that place. It's been mentioned in town records, but always with a note of warning." She opened the book to a page marked with a faded ribbon and began to read aloud. The legend spoke of a witch from the colonial era, banished from Willow's End for her dark practices. Before leaving, she cursed the town, promising that on Halloween, the veil between the living and the dead would thin, and she would have her revenge. "The mansion was her home," Miss Helen explained, her voice low. "It's said that she disappears into the shadows, waiting to reclaim what was once hers. Anyone who enters her domain on Halloween risks being taken by the shadows, lost forever between worlds." Tommy felt a chill run down his spine. This was no longer just a Halloween scare, it was a matter of life and death. He asked Miss Helen if there was any way to break the witch's curse. "The legends mention a talisman," she continued, flipping to another page. "Something that belonged to her, imbued with her power. It could supposedly break the curse or at least protect against it." Tommy immediately thought of the old coin he had found. Pulling it from his pocket, he showed it to Miss Helen, who inspected it closely with a magnifying glass. The symbols matched those described in the book associated with the witch's artifacts. "This could be it," she said, a hint of hope in her voice. "But be careful, Tommy. Such items are often protected by powerful magic." Armed with new knowledge and the coin, Tommy felt a renewed sense of purpose. He and Mark made plans to return to the mansion at midnight, the witching hour, to use the talisman to try and rescue their friends and break the curse once and for all. As they left the library, the wind seemed to carry a whisper, a warning, as if the town itself knew the danger they were about to face. But there was no turning back now. As Tommy and Mark prepared for their midnight venture, the atmosphere in Willow's End seemed to pulse with a silent anticipation. With each passing hour, the shadows around the town grew thicker and more animate, almost as if they were drawing strength from the approaching witching hour. Residents who were still out hurried their steps, instinctively sensing the deepening chill that wasn't just from the autumn air. Tommy went home to gather a few things he thought they might need: salt, which folklore claimed could ward off evil spirits, and a couple of iron nails from his father's workshop, known for disrupting magic. He also took a flashlight, extra batteries, and his grandfather's old compass, the latter more for a sense of security than navigation. Mark met him at his house, carrying a backpack filled with bottles of water, some food, and a first aid kit. Back at Tommy's house, as they divided the supplies, Tommy's hands lingered on the old coin, now more precious than ever. He recounted the tale Miss Helen had shared about the talisman to Mark, emphasizing its supposed protective powers. Mark listened, nodding solemnly, the weight of their task sobering. "Do you really think this will work?" Mark asked, skepticism and fear mixing in his voice. "It's the best shot we have," Tommy replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We have to try something. I can't leave them in there." As the town clock tower chimed 11, a reminder of the passing time, they set out. The streets of Willow's End were deserted now, the earlier festive atmosphere replaced by a tense silence. The only sounds were their footsteps and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees, making the fallen leaves swirl like specters dancing in the night. Reaching the path to Willow Lane, the darkness seemed even denser than before, the trees arching over the path like a tunnel leading into another world. With each step, the shadows seemed to press closer, as if curious or hungry. Tommy felt the coin warm in his pocket, a small comfort against the growing dread. When they arrived at the clearing, the mansion loomed ominously before them, its silhouette even more foreboding under the moonlight. The air was colder here, the silence deeper. As they approached the mansion, the door creaked open by itself, a silent invitation to enter the darkness within. With a deep breath, Tommy led the way inside, his flashlight cutting through the blackness. The inside of the mansion felt alive, as if the house itself was aware of their presence. The air was thick with the scent of decay and old dust, and somewhere in the depths of the house, a floorboard creaked, as though something, or someone, was moving in the shadows. They proceeded carefully, avoiding the main staircase where Ellie had disappeared. Instead, they explored the ground floor, Tommy sprinkling salt in their wake, a thin line of protection against whatever might follow. As they moved, the shadows seemed to watch, to gather, drawing closer with palpable intent. Suddenly, a cold gust swept through the hallway, extinguishing their flashlights. In the pitch darkness, whispers filled the air, echoes of the past, or perhaps the witch herself, speaking in a language forgotten by time but felt in the soul. They fumbled for their flashlights, hands shaking as they tried to banish the darkness once more. The light flickered back to life, revealing that the shadows had drawn even closer, now just out of reach. They were surrounded on all sides but one, the path leading deeper into the mansion, towards the heart of the darkness and the source of the witch's power. With no way back, they pressed forward, the old coin burning hot against Tommy's chest, a beacon in the night that promised either salvation or doom. Armed only with their meager defenses, Tommy and Mark pressed deeper into the belly of the mansion. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the air grew colder, thick with the scent of mold and a faint, almost forgotten smell of charred wood and smoke. The house whispered with the echoes of 1,000 lost souls, and every shadow seemed to stretch towards them with malicious intent. As they advanced, Tommy felt the coin in his pocket pulsate, as if it were alive. It grew uncomfortably hot, yet he dared not remove it, fearing to lose even the smallest protection it provided. They followed the narrow hallway towards the rear of the house, where the air seemed to buzz with an unseen energy. "I think we're getting close," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible over the continuous low moan that seemed to permeate the structure. "Close to what?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. "Whatever it is, it feels like it doesn't want us here." "Just keep moving," Tommy urged, pushing forward. Their flashlights flickered as they approached a heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway. It stood slightly ajar, and a cold, blue light seeped through the gap, casting eerie shadows on the floor. Tommy paused, his hand on the doorknob, feeling the engraved wood cold and slick under his touch. He pushed the door open, and the room beyond bathed in a ghostly light that seemed to originate from nowhere. The walls were lined with ancient books and strange artifacts that buzzed with an arcane energy. At the center of the room stood a large, circular table covered with a myriad of talismans and symbols, and in the middle, a single candle burned with a blue flame that flickered as if alive. "This has to be it," Tommy said, stepping into the room, the air crackling around him. "The heart of her power." As they approached the table, the temperature dropped sharply. The shadows around them swirled and thickened, forming the outline of a figure, a woman, her features obscured by the darkness, yet her presence undeniable and overwhelming. "The witch," Mark gasped, stepping back. Tommy reached into his pocket and clutched the coin firmly, drawing strength from its heat. He approached the figure, his heart pounding in his ears. "Where are our friends?" he demanded, his voice steady despite his fear. "What have you done with them?" The shadowy figure of the witch laughed, a sound like cracking wood. "They are here, with me, in the shadows. They belong to this place now, as do all who dare to trespass." Tommy felt a surge of anger. "We'll leave. All of us. Just let them go." "Too late for bargains, boy," the witch's voice hissed around the room. The hour has come, and the shadows are hungry. Without another word, Tommy pulled out the coin and held it high. The room filled with a brilliant light, and the witch shrieked, her form wavering as the light from the coin seemed to burn her. "Mark, the salt!" Tommy yelled. Mark quickly formed a circle of salt around them, reinforcing their barrier. The witch's screams filled the room, echoing off the walls and shaking the foundation of the house. As the light from the coin intensified, parts of her shadowy form began to dissipate, like smoke in the wind. "You may weaken me, but you cannot destroy me," she cried. "Not while my curse remains." Tommy, thinking quickly, grabbed an old book from the table and began to read aloud. The words were strange, foreign, but the coin seemed to guide him, its heat pulsating with each correctly uttered syllable. The witch's form continued to fade, her screams becoming desperate. As Tommy recited the last of the incantation, a loud, thunderous noise shook the mansion, and the witch's form completely vanished, leaving behind only a wisp of dark smoke that dissipated into nothingness. The oppressive energy in the house lifted, and the air cleared. Mark and Tommy, exhausted but relieved, fell back as the room returned to normal. They had done it, they had faced the witch and survived. Now, all that was left was to find their friends and escape the mansion before the dawn. With the witch's form dissipated, an eerie silence fell over the mansion. The oppressive atmosphere that had choked the air was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of relief. Tommy and Mark, still shaken but bolstered by their success, hurried to search the mansion for their friends. They moved quickly, their flashlights sweeping through the now less menacing corridors. The mansion seemed to have surrendered, its hallways and rooms no longer whispering with malice but echoing with the quiet of a place long forgotten. As they ascended the grand staircase to the upper floors, the first hints of pre-dawn light began to filter through the grimy windows. In the upper hallway, they found doors to various rooms ajar. Tommy and Mark called out, their voices carrying hope and urgency. "Ellie! Luke!" Tommy shouted. Each room they checked was empty, but undeterred, they continued, knowing that every moment mattered. Finally, in what appeared to have been a lavish master bedroom, they found Ellie and Luke. The siblings were unconscious but breathing, lying on the floor near an old wooden wardrobe that stood ominously open. Mark checked their pulses while Tommy gathered them into his arms, shaking them gently. "Ellie, wake up. Please, wake up," Tommy urged, his voice cracking with emotion. Slowly, Ellie's eyes fluttered open, confusion etched across her face. "Tommy," she murmured, her voice weak. "What happened?" "We're here to get you out." "You're safe now," Tommy reassured her, helping her to sit up. Luke stirred next, blinking against the light of a flashlight. "How did we get here?" Luke asked, rubbing his head. "It was the witch. She took you, but it's okay now." "She's gone," Mark explained as he helped Luke to his feet. With Ellie and Luke now awake, albeit weak and disoriented, the group made their way back down the stairs. The mansion, now just an old house, seemed less like a trap and more like a shell of horrors past. As they stepped outside, the first rays of the morning sun touched the horizon, casting warm light that felt like a benediction after the long, terrifying night. The air was fresh, free of the chill that had accompanied the witch's presence. "We did it," Tommy said, a mix of disbelief and relief in his voice as they reached the safety of the road leading back to town. "Did you really see her?" "The witch?" Ellie asked, still trying to piece together her fragmented memories. "Yes, but she won't bother us anymore." "We made sure of it," Tommy replied, glancing at the coin which now lay quiet and cold in his pocket. As they walked back towards Willow's End, the town was waking up, oblivious to the night's events. Houses lit up one by one, and the early risers started their day, unaware of the darkness that had almost taken hold. Tommy looked back at the mansion, its form now just a part of the landscape under the rising sun. They had faced something ancient and evil, and they had prevailed. But as they left the shadow of the mansion behind, a part of him wondered if they had truly seen the last of the Witch of Maple Street. As the group made their way back into the heart of Willow's End, the town stirred to life, ignorant of the night's eerie trespasses. Ellie, Luke, Mark, and Tommy, though weary and worn from their ordeal, felt a kinship forged in the fires of shared terror and triumph. However, a shadow of doubt lingered in Tommy's mind. Was the witch truly vanquished? The friends decided to regroup at the local diner, a cozy establishment that had just begun to welcome its first customers of the day. As they sat in a booth by the window, sipping hot chocolate and picking at pancakes, they recounted each detail of the night to Jenna, who had rejoined them, relieved to find her friends safe. "I can't believe all this happened while we were just out trick-or-treating," Jenna said, her eyes wide with a mix of horror and fascination. "Yeah, it got pretty intense," Mark added, glancing at Tommy, who seemed distracted, his gaze frequently shifting towards the window as if expecting to see the witch's silhouette against the morning light. Tommy, still processing the night's events, replayed the confrontation in his mind. The witch's last words echoed, "You may weaken me, but you cannot destroy me. Not while my curse remains." This left him uneasy. He pulled out the coin, turning it over in his hands. It was cold now, devoid of the heat it had radiated during their encounter. "We need to be sure she's really gone," Tommy finally said. "I think I tricked her into dispersing her form, but if there's even a chance that she can come back." "So what do you suggest we do?" Ellie asked, her expression serious. "I want to go back to the mansion, just one more time," Tommy replied. "We need to check if there are any signs of her return. And this time, we need to be prepared for anything." Armed with newfound resolve and daylight on their side, the group agreed to accompany Tommy back to the mansion. They equipped themselves better this time, carrying more salt, iron nails, and even some sage Ellie insisted might help ward off evil spirits. As they approached the mansion under the bright morning sun, the place looked less daunting, more dilapidated and sad. They entered cautiously, finding everything just as they had left it, the remnants of their previous night's hurried escape still evident. Tommy led them directly to the room where they had confronted the witch. The circle of salt was undisturbed, and the candle had long burned out. The room felt empty, devoid of the malevolent energy that had pulsated through its walls just hours before. "Looks like you did it, Tommy." "There's nothing here," Mark said after a thorough search, a hint of relief in his voice. Tommy, however, was drawn to the bookshelf where he had grabbed the incantation book. He scanned the titles, pulling out a few that seemed out of place. Behind one larger tome, he discovered a hidden compartment that held a small, leather-bound diary. It seemed ancient, the pages yellowed with age, the writing faded. Opening it carefully, Tommy found entries that detailed the witch's life, her exile, and her vengeful plans. Towards the end, a passage caught his eye. "To bind my spirit to this realm, my heart must remain hidden within my domain, never to be destroyed." "This could be it," Tommy said, showing the others. "If we find and remove whatever she's talking about, maybe then we can end this for good." The search became more focused, and after several tense hours, hidden beneath the floorboards of the very room they were in, they found an intricately carved wooden box containing a small, blackened heart, hard and cold as stone. Tommy remembered the witch's shrieks as the coin's light had hit her. "Maybe this needs to be exposed to the same light," he suggested, placing the heart in the center of the room and holding the coin above it. The coin flickered once, twice, then shone with an intense light. The heart cracked, the sound loud in the silent room, and crumbled into dust. As the last remnants of the heart disappeared, a feeling of peace settled over the mansion, the air suddenly fresher, as if a window had been opened to let in the spring air after a long, stifling winter. "Do you think that's it?" Ellie asked, a hopeful note in her voice. "I think so," Tommy said, a broad smile breaking over his face for the first time since the ordeal began. "I really think that's it." After destroying what they believed to be the source of the witch's power, the group felt a tangible shift in the atmosphere of the mansion. The air was lighter, almost breathable, as if a perpetual fog had lifted. They took a moment to celebrate their potential victory, the relief palpable among them. However, their celebration was short-lived. As they prepared to leave the mansion for good, a sudden and violent gust of wind slammed all the doors shut, plunging them into darkness once more. The candle that had previously burned out flickered to life with a menacing blue flame. the shadows in the corners of the room grew denser, coalescing into a familiar form. The witch, though less defined, her features blurred as if she were struggling to maintain her presence. "You think you can destroy me so easily?" her voice echoed, distorted like the wind through dead leaves. "I am bound to this place by more than a mere heart." Tommy clutched the coin tightly, its surface beginning to warm against his palm. "We destroyed your heart. Your power should be gone," he shouted into the growing darkness. "A witch's curse is not so easily broken, boy," the witch hissed, her form swirling in the shadows. "My spirit is tied to this land, to the very soil of Willow's End. You cannot eradicate me entirely unless you wipe this town from existence." Determined not to be outdone and driven by a desperate hope to end this once and for all, Tommy stepped forward. "Then we'll just have to find another way to bind you," he said, recalling the passages from the witch's diary. He remembered a ritual described as a binding of spirits, intended for containing malevolent forces. Ellie, quick thinking, pulled out her phone and found a picture she had taken of the diary pages. "Here, Tommy, this might be what we need," she said, illuminating the screen. Tommy read quickly, absorbing the ancient words. The ritual required a circle of salt, which Mark and Luke quickly laid down, and an offering from the land itself. Ellie, remembering the sage she had brought, placed it at the center of the salt circle as their offering. "Join hands," Tommy instructed, and they did, forming a ring around the circle. Tommy began to recite the words from Ellie's phone, his voice steady and clear. The witch's form flickered, her screams becoming shrill as the ritual took effect. The air in the room charged with energy, static prickling their skin. The witch's form began to shrink, compressing into a tight mass of shadow at the center of the circle, until she was no more substantial than a wisp of smoke. "You may bind me, but I will never be truly gone," the witch's voice threatened, now barely a whisper as it faded away, confined within the bounds of their makeshift ritual. As the last echo of her voice died away, the candle snuffed out, and the room fell silent. The oppressive presence was gone, the air was clean, no longer bearing the weight of centuries-old grudges. They stepped back, hands still joined, looking at the space where the witch had been. "Is it over?" Luke asked, his voice a mix of hope and uncertainty. "It's over," Tommy confirmed, feeling the finality in his bones. "She's bound to the circle. As long as we leave it undisturbed, she'll stay trapped, powerless." They left the mansion as the sun rose, the light seeming to cleanse the last vestiges of the night's horrors. They walked back into town, the early morning calm a stark contrast to the nightmare they had endured. Back at the diner, they finally allowed themselves a real moment of relief. Over breakfast, they discussed the night's events, the bond formed among them unspoken but strong. They had faced true evil together and had emerged victorious, albeit shaken. The story of the Witch of Maple Street would live on in hushed whispers and cautious tales, a legend to chill the bones of those who dared to remember. But for Tommy, Ellie, Mark, Luke, and Jenna, it was a chapter of their lives they would never forget, a testament to their courage and their unyielding fight against the darkness. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees of Willow's End, Tommy, Ellie, Mark, Luke, and Jenna found themselves sitting in the local diner, a place that had become an unexpected haven after the horrors of the night. They were physically exhausted, but a sense of unspoken camaraderie and relief washed over them. Their town might never know the extent of what had occurred, but each of them carried the weight and the triumph of their ordeal. The waitress, recognizing the weary group, kept the coffee coming and added extra pancakes to their plates without a word, her knowing smile suggesting she understood the need for comfort after a long night, even if she didn't know the details. Tommy looked around the table at his friends, their faces illuminated by the morning sun streaming through the diner's windows. Despite the fear and the danger, he felt a profound gratitude for each of them. They had stood together against something unimaginable, and they had won. "Guys, I just want to say," Tommy started, but was interrupted by Jenna. "No need, Tommy. We all feel it," she said, her eyes tired but shining with the bond they had strengthened. Luke chimed in, "We did something incredible last night. It's something that will stay with us forever." Ellie took her brother's hand, squeezing it. "I'm just glad we're all safe and together." That's all that matters. The conversation turned lighter as they ate, discussing plans for the upcoming school week, deliberately steering clear of any talk of witches or curses. Yet, the experience lingered in the air around them, an unspoken agreement that they had changed. As breakfast wound down, Tommy proposed a visit to the edge of town, near where the old mansion stood. "One last trip, just to make sure everything is still quiet," he said, needing that final closure. They agreed, and after settling the bill, they drove out to the mansion. The house looked different in the daylight, less menacing, more just an old building that had seen better times. They walked around but didn't enter, respecting the new boundaries they had set with the witch's binding. "It looks just like any old house now," Mark noted, a hint of disbelief in his voice as if the events of the night could have been a shared dream. "Yeah, but we know better," Tommy replied. He led them to the spot where the circle of salt lay. It was undisturbed, a permanent seal now part of the landscape. Feeling a chapter of their lives closing, they left the mansion behind, the morning sun high in the sky heralding the start of a new day. As they drove back to town, the normalcy of Willow's End unfolded around them, people jogging, neighbors waving, and kids on bicycles. Life would go on, perhaps untouched by the darkness they had faced. But for Tommy, Ellie, Mark, Luke, and Jenna, they carried a new resilience, a proof of their strength and a secret that bonded them deeply. They were no longer just friends, they were guardians of a quiet legend, keepers of a story that would someday become just another eerie tale of Willow's End. As they reached the center of town, Tommy looked around at the familiar streets, the mundane scenes of daily life. He knew they would move past this, but he also knew they were forever changed, bound together by their bravery, their fears, and their victories. This Halloween had shown them the depths of darkness, but more importantly, the enduring power of light.